Hey guys, Gretchen here. It is time for another installment of my American President Reading Challenge series. If you don't know what I'm talking about, there's a reason for that. I made exactly one episode about this and I did it about a year ago. So clearly I'm just on top of everything. I will link to that video up above, but just for a recap, if you don't know, I'm currently working my way through a biography on every single United States president because I hate myself. I don't know why. I got interested in it and now I'm doing it and it's been over a year and at this point I'm too committed to stop. So I've just been going. Last video, I summarized all of the biographies that I had read up to Andrew Jackson. So again, if you're interested in George Washington through Andrew Jackson, minus James Monroe, because I didn't find one for him, check out that video. Again, that's linked up above. We are going to start not with Martin Van Buren, who is the president after Andrew Jackson, but a couple down. The reason is that I have been thus far unable to find biographies on Martin Van Buren and his successor, William Henry Harrison. Now, there are some strictures to the books that I've been reading. I've been reading only audiobooks up till this point. They've been my companion while I do chores or my commute, whatever. So when I say haven't been able to find a biography, I mean that I haven't found an audiobook, whether e-audio or disc audio, to listen to. Now that I'm not in grad school anymore, I do hope to back up to these people that I've missed and read some biographies, but we're not there yet. So sorry to Martin Van Buren and sorry to William Henry Harrison, but we're just gonna keep going. William Henry Harrison is pertinent to this video for one reason, however, and that is because William Henry Harrison died after being president for about 90 days. And his vice president, John Tyler, was the first vice president to become president, and he was the one who found out how very, very little the Constitution actually figured out how in the world the vice president was supposed to succeed the president. So his presidency is actually really, really interesting. Unfortunately, John Tyler is not much of interest to people in recent years, like a lot of years, which is unfortunate because again, John Tyler is the first vice president to become president. He decided to completely go against his own party by the end of his presidency. He was never elected in his own right, but by the end of the presidency he finished for William Henry Harrison. He had alienated like all the parties. Nobody would elect him. It's kind of insane. So he is really, really interesting, but the book that I read or listened to about John Tyler was actually a compendium book. It's a brand new release from last year called Accidental Presidents, The 8 Men Who Changed America by Jared Cohen. Accidental President, as the name suggests, is a book profiling all of the vice presidents who became president after something happened to the president they were serving, John Tyler being the first one. Unfortunately, it means that it's, a normal-sized book cut into 8 sections, and it does tend to focus on some of the more well-known vice presidents who became president, such as Teddy Roosevelt and Lyndon Johnson. But there was a section on him. It gave me a brief overview of his life and presidency, and unfortunately for the moment it's going to have to be enough unless I go backwards and revisit him. But even just finding books on John Tyler has been really, really hard. That being said, the interesting thing about Accidental Presidents is that it profiles how the transition has changed over time. So like I said, with John Tyler, nobody knew how a vice president should take over for a president. Should he be called acting president? They didn't even know. And so it's just really interesting to see that change over time towards the smoother process that we have now of the succession. So if that's something that you're interested in and you want a brief profile of 8 different presidencies, it is really, really interesting to see how these men took to their position, how they succeeded or failed. So maybe put that on your list. So like I said, John Tyler did not win the presidency in his own right. He finished out William Henry Harrison's term, and because he had alienated all political people so much, he didn't even really run for re-election. Instead, the next president who ran and was elected was a gentleman named James K. Polk. What do you know about Polk? Because when I started this, it was very, very little. One of the things that I do know about Polk, however, is that oftentimes people talk about him as if he were like a dark horse candidate. People say he came out of nowhere and suddenly became president, you know, that kind of a thing. Turns out that's a myth. So the biography that I read on James K. Polk is, and I have a title card here because it's so long, Polk, the Man Who Transformed the Presidency and America by Walter R. Borneman. Now, from that title, you might guess that Borneman has a serious agenda with this Polk biography. And that's basically to say that Polk isn't some dark horse candidate whose single term can be forgotten about. He's really, really important to the American presidency. After reading the biography, I don't know if I agree with how important his presidency was, but I do agree that he definitely wasn't a dark horse candidate. I found out a bunch of stuff, like Polk was a protege of Andrew Jackson, he filled a whole bunch of really high political positions, and he had Andrew Jackson's entire political machine backing him when he ran for president. So he clearly wasn't a dark horse candidate. A lot of people knew who he was. And that's really interesting to see how we have this myth now that he was a dark horse candidate that came out of nowhere, as opposed to the truth, which Borneman lays out in this biography. So I still don't know if I super care about Polk as a president, but seeing that myth versus reality is really interesting. So if that's something you're into, recommend it for that. So Polk's single term as president ended, and he was succeeded by Zachary Taylor. I have to skip Zachary Taylor in the lineup because once again, there couldn't find a biography to listen to on him at this moment in time, which is unfortunate because Zachary Taylor was a great war general. I'm sure there's a lot of stories. However, his presidency is only so-so. Zachary Taylor also died in office, and he was succeeded by his vice president, Millard Fillmore. The only way that I've been able to cover Millard Fillmore is, again, using Accidental Presidents by Jared Cohen. And again, really, really interesting reading that book in sum because you see how John Tyler struggled to assert himself as the president instead of the vice president. And by the time you get to Millard Fillmore, which follows so closely on the heels of John Tyler, he's able to take all the precedents that John Tyler set and take them for his own. So even just those two vice presidential successions are very interesting. Millard Fillmore as a president, however, pretty blah. I would like to go back and find a full biography on him, but I mean, I honestly can't even tell you one interesting thing that I learned. Poor Millard. So Millard Fillmore was succeeded by Franklin Pierce, who was this great, young, up-and-coming statesman who had everything going for him, but right after he was elected, he was in a train crash with his entire family. He was the only person to survive. His wife and all his kids died, and his single-term presidency was pretty, depressed, apparently, because he was just so out of his mind due to these deaths. Because it's such a crazy presidency, I honestly can't believe I couldn't find a biography on him to listen to, but he's another one that I have to revisit, as well as his successor, James Buchanan. Couldn't find a biography to listen to on him either, and it's really unfortunate because this is the period leading up to the Civil War, and I'm sure there are a lot of interesting political things to talk about there, because if you just look at the Civil War through Lincoln and just the war itself, you don't get the fuller context, which is one of the things that I'm after. So I hope to revisit those two presidents soon. Speaking of Abraham Lincoln is the guy who follows James Buchanan, and I did not have a problem finding a bajillion biographies that I could listen to about him. I ended up going with Team of Rivals, The Political Genius of Abraham Lincoln by Doris Kearns Goodwin, which, if we're being honest, was a little bit of a different choice. It's not a full biography of Lincoln. It focuses more on how Lincoln filled his cabinet with all of the men who challenged him for the presidential nomination, and how all of these men fought at each other until Lincoln said, we're all going to work together. And then they didn't really want to work together, but they made it work out. I wanted to take Team of Rivals on as opposed to a different, more staid biography of Lincoln, because I thought it would have more interesting things to say. There's so much written about Lincoln that I already feel like I know his whole life story. And Team of Rivals succeeded in that. I love Doris Kearns Goodwin, and I've read some of her other books after Team of Rivals because I just love Team of Rivals so much. And it really is just chewing on how political rivalry can turn into political friendship under the right circumstances, and the crucible of the Civil War. It's just really good. So if you've ever thought about reading a Doris Kearns Goodwin, I highly recommend it. Again, I've read some of her other stuff by this point because Team of Rivals was so good. It flew by, and I felt like I just really got into a political mind of Abraham Lincoln. So highly recommend that one. Abraham Lincoln, unfortunately, also dies in office, although he is assassinated, not dying of natural causes, and he is succeeded by Andrew Johnson. Do you know how many times I have gotten in my life Andrew Jackson and Andrew Johnson mixed up? Andrew Jackson and Andrew Johnson, very different people. The book that I ended up reading on Andrew Johnson is a new release from last year, and it's The Impeachers, The Trial of Andrew Johnson and the Dream of a Just Nation by Brenda Wineapple. As the title suggests, it's more focused on Andrew Johnson's impeachment than his entire biography. Andrew Johnson was the first president against whom impeachment proceedings were brought. He was acquitted by just one vote, so technically he was never impeached, but it was the first time that those proceedings had been brought, and it set a lot of precedent that we still use when we bring impeachment proceedings. Wineapple's book was really incredible. It highlighted a bunch of different people, a bunch of different Civil War agendas. Even though I wasn't able to find a bunch of books set before the Civil War and that political quagmire, The Impeachers does an excellent job showing how, Abraham Lincoln was thought to be the leader who could lead America safely out of the Civil War, and Andrew Johnson was the exact opposite. But there were so many other political figures with different political agendas, all trying to get something out of, the mess that America had been made into after the end of the Civil War. Yes, some of it is about slavery, some of it is about racism, but some of these people took a side depending on money, personal avarice, and there's so many names, important names in Wineapple's book that I'd never heard of before. I also did read about Andrew Johnson in Accidental Presidents, of course, but by reading Impeachers as well, I just dove so much more deeply into this political quagmire, the political situation, and how that whole impeachment thing worked the first time and how it didn't work. And there's a lot of lessons and interesting political facts and tidbits in that book. And again, it is a newer release, which is really interesting. Not a lot of new books on these older presidents unless they're like Lincoln or Washington, stuff like that. So if you're at all interested in that subject matter, I highly recommend that one as well. After so many really long titles and needing my little cheat sheet card to get them right, I almost don't believe that Ron Chernow's book about Ulysses S. Grant is just called Grant. If you watched my first video, you might know that Ron Chernow's Alexander Hamilton is what set off this entire debacle about reading a biography on every United States president, because I realized how much I didn't know just by reading the biography of a man I knew almost nothing about. Alexander Hamilton was also a fantastic book. I did read Chernow's Washington for George Washington, and I was like, this is fine, doesn't have the magic of Hamilton. So when I got around to Grant on Ulysses S. Grant, I wasn't sure how that was going to go. Grant is phenomenal. It's like 800, 900 pages of a book, so it's really, really big, and it was over 30 or 40 hours in audiobook. But it was so worth it. Chernow gets a really amazing man, puts out all his flaws, all his positives, and just, it's so engaging. Ulysses S. Grant as a president and as a person is also super fascinating. He was a failure, he was a general, he was a president, he was an author. Like, did you know that the sales of Grant's memoirs, which he wrote by himself, needing almost no editing, were edited and published by Mark Twain, and it was the proceeds from publishing that gave us Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn? Had no idea. Grant is worth reading about as a story of just like human foibles, perseverance, and how to just keep going when you keep falling down. He also wasn't that great of a president, and it's not often when you're reading through these books that people will write about failed presidencies or issues in presidencies and just say, yeah, that person screwed up. And Chernow, I mean, he gives you explanations for why they happened, but he also does say, that's just Grant, and doesn't try to continue to really make him a hero when he wasn't, but gives him his due when he was. So highly, highly recommend that one. Last book I'm going to talk about today is the audiobook that I listened to for Grant's successor. So Grant had the first two-term presidency in like generations. So he was president for 8 years, and then he was followed by Rutherford B. Hayes. I listened to a biography called Rutherford B. Hayes by Hans Trefus. It's actually part of a series on American presidents, so it really wasn't that long, wasn't super in-depth, but it was the only one that I could find, and I really, really wanted to listen to it because Hayes is one half of what was considered the corrupt bargain. So there was an issue when he was elected in the Electoral College, and there's been this theory for forever that Hayes bought the presidency, essentially. The book barely goes into that at all. Basically says, I mean, something happened, but we don't really know what, but it probably wasn't a corrupt bargain. And then it just kind of moves on. So the one thing I wanted out of my Hayes biography really wasn't there. Again, it was shorter. After reading like 800 pages on Grant, it was crazy to read like 200 to 300 on a president. But yeah, I have no answer about the corrupt bargain. If you have a better biography of Rutherford B. Hayes to point me towards, you do that. So I am much, much further on in my journey than I could possibly fit in this video, but I'm going to stop here for right now and come at you with another episode in a little bit. Hopefully not a year, because I have the material for like 2 more videos because I'm so far along. So I'll see you guys next time with more updates on the biographies that I've read. Feel free to follow me on Goodreads if you'd like to track my progress. My plan is to go down the succession as far as I possibly can with the audiobooks that I have access to, and then to back up and do the ones that I missed. But before the pandemic, I was listening to a biography on Truman, Harry S. Truman, just to give you an idea of where I am versus the end of this video. But it's on CD and it's in my car, and I'm currently not driving my car super much, so I don't know when I'll finish that one. So might hit a few bumps in the road, but we'll get there eventually. Thanks for watching, guys. Bye.